Teachers.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Mr. Fickle and Mrs. Mellett for working with me today to try our best to get the information turned around quickly for all of you relative to some of the questions that were raised last night. Some of the questions that you see on this document, we did answer last night. I just still put them on here in order to memorialize the answers because our thought process was if you had questions, then others may have the same questions as we continue through the budget process. So, the first question, it is a correction. We were off by one. On the superintendent's PowerPoint, you mentioned Southington is 21st in the lowest spending per pupil out of how many districts, and that's out of 169. And then it says there's a slide that mentions the total budget change, percentage of 30.1% increase. That is not the overall budget. That was just the percentage increase of the recommended budget increase overall, not just the existing personnel. It was only for new personnel. Is the HVAC mandate for all schools, even if we have application into state for construction? And the answer to that is yes. I do want to correct one thing. I misspoke, and after talking with Mr. Romano, that figure, Mr. Williams asked the question, does include all schools. I was under an assumption that it was not necessary for schools built after 2003. That's why I get the answer I did, and I was wrong on that. So that's been corrected. We are looking at an increase in new personnel, not asking for level of services, and that was from Mrs. Carmody, and we did put, yes, the requested personnel would be increased for the high school class offerings, particularly due to the state mandate for personal finance as a graduation requirement. When you add a requirement for 500 students to all have to take a course prior to graduation, that, if you average it out at 25 students per class, that's 5 sections in a semester. That's a full-time teacher. If you add that we can offer it over 2 semesters, then that gets us 10 sections. That's only 250 students. So we've got our work cut out in order to fulfill that requirement. We're looking who is covered by MERS. That was a great question, and it was related, I think, not only to the cost of the benefits that were associated with some of the new personnel requests, but we defined that for you. That was secretarial, custodial, paraeducators, ABAs, technology staff, non-certified administrators, and maintenance. And that applies to anybody working full-time and part-time staff working more than 20 hours. So it's not only for full-time personnel. And then the associated percentages are included relative to what we've budgeted. With the return of the 4 special education teachers Nexus, what would be used for those funds? As we talked about last night, it depends on the amount of Nexus services billed available, right? So we don't know what that number is year over year because we don't know what services we're going to be providing to students next year and to how many students. We've talked about in past budgets, there was an overcommitment on Nexus funds in years to costs associated with personnel and trying to bring it back to a number that more aligns with what we've been collecting. There was a question regarding the increases in utilities and do we expect to see savings. So we're going to run a projection of current costs versus costs for the same year over prior, and we're going to work with our energy management consultant. So I hope to have that for you for next Thursday's meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. What is driving the transportation costs? As Mr. Romano alluded to, that's part of the contract that we are in the final year of next year. There was a 3.5% increase associated with that. With the Nexus, how many students do we service? We'll provide this information once we send our first bill for services to Hartford. So we actually won't know that number until we send the bill out. What is driving the increase in health insurance? There's a long answer there, but I'm going to defer on that one because I think that's, it was talked about extensively last night, and there was advisement to work through self-insurance to get more specifics on that. Could the HVAC mandate be covered by grant funding? And we said the inspections are not. However, work for future HVAC work may be covered by grant applications. On the summary of new personnel requested, further explain the 2 ABA salary and benefits. That was Mr. Darnowski's question, and we explained that the amount of benefits isn't just health insurance, it's all of the associated costs, including MERS, Medicare, Social Security, health insurance, life and disability, unemployment, and workers' compensation. And so that was something that Mrs. Mellett and I have really focused pretty heavily on the past 2 years, that I think in prior years there was a mindset on the salary of the employee. And we said, well, it's $26,000. It's something we can do. When you really took all of those associated costs, the total cost is actually $54,000 if you're adding some of these positions. which is something that we've really tried to consider when we're making those decisions now. To see a breakdown of requested positions driven by demographic, I'm going to create that into a prettier chart for you, but for the sake of getting it onto the grid here and having the answer for you tonight, the TESOL is a demographic request. Based on the October multilingual presentation, you saw that our multilingual population is something that has doubled, and therefore 3 certified teachers for 210 students across 11 schools has become quite the assignment. So that's the request for that staff. High school teachers for the business are mandated. That's related to the personal finance. Tech ed and classroom teachers are enrollment-driven. Tech ed because there were course offerings we could not provide, and enrollment for elementary based on class size guidelines. The pre-K 5 staff and all of the related support staff on that list are mandate-driven. That's because of the K age change requirement, and it has to do with the special education students who are not applying for a waiver and the law that we still have to provide them FAPE. The mental health were included. That was my decision because it was an across-the-board administrative request coupled with loss of mental health staff due to the lapsing of the ARPESSER funds. How many less students will there be for the incoming pre-K 5 class? And I think the question is how many less K students will there be based on the waivers that are not granted. We still have 2 more screeners this Saturday and again next Saturday. At this point, only 60 of the 90 indicated that they would be requesting waiver have signed up for a waiver, meaning some may be holding out on screening, hoping the later dates might provide children with the gift of time and a competitive advantage. The bottom line, we only have a rough estimate after these 3 Saturdays, and we'll need to estimate how many remaining students might not be granted a waiver based on ratios. So if we can say confidently we've screened 50 kids and this many students were granted a waiver, then we can probably use the remaining number of students that haven't requested a waiver yet and factor in what an approximate number would be. The substitutes, those are costs. We addressed this question last night. What is the breakdown in the increase? And it is associated with the shift in the funding sources for building substitutes who are assigned daily. It reflects their salaries now in this line item, coupled with higher rates agreed to by the board for retired subs and daily subs. You may recall a story about a month ago in the Record Journal on substitute teachers and the pay rates of substitute teachers. We were just above Wallingford and we were below Cheshire and Meriden in terms of what we're currently paying. But I do think the increase has at least helped us to stay afloat. As we know, substitute teacher shortage is real. A lot of it has to do with the increase in minimum wage that people are earning, that they now can go out and work jobs that are a little more predictable and stable and maybe a little less stressful for a similar rate of pay. The best case scenario for tuition reimbursement, we touched upon this a little bit as well as last night. It would be for us to get the whole 42% from the state that they've promised for districts that are now only budgeting at 58%. We can only collect up to 58% of the tuition. Now that goes 2 ways. I explained that on the slide. We can only collect 58% of the tuition that we had been collecting for students in our Ag-Sci program, with the understanding that the state's going to make us whole for the remaining 42% for those students. But also, we pay a certain amount of tuition for students that leave Southington and go to charter or magnet schools. Those schools can only charge us 58% of the expected tuition. However, the state needs to make them whole. The fair, as described to me by CREC, is that if the state doesn't make them whole, then they will have no choice but to bill us higher than 58%, understandably. And that's where our hesitation is to move that number until we know that they're going to be made whole. So stay tuned on that front. Context for major budget reductions.
Can I add something on that? Is it okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was at a CREC meeting on Tuesday, and we talked about this, and they are requesting the 100%. I guess the issue was it was not in the governor's budget last year, whereas the legislature had people supporting it, and they're hoping this year it shows up in his budget in addition. So
Yeah.
I think it's probably better than 50-50 it shows up, but
Yeah.
I don't want to.
So that is one of those prime examples for us as a board, if we're able to wait until, let's say, February 8th for a special meeting, we'll know based on the governor's budget that Wednesday whether it's in there or not, and we can make the last-minute adjustment accordingly.
And Steve, if I can just say, I was on a call today this morning with all the CASBO business members, and one of the legislatures, Jeff Curry, who's on the committee, he urges us as a district to budget at the 58%. but he knows there were a lot of business managers on there speaking of their, they called it PTSD from previous, reimbursement grants from the state. So he's hoping that districts will do the 58% to show that the need for the remaining 42% is there and will be supported. But I agree with Steve that maybe by the beginning of February, we would have a better idea. So right now, what's in the budget is 100% of tuitions. And like we talked about last night, we did reduce that line item for the number of enrollments, a decrease in the enrollments at magnet schools. So
Could we get a breakdown of where that funding has fallen short in years past?
Well, this particular item is a new legislation, so we've never had a funding reimbursement formula relative to charter magnet schools.
Okay, let me rephrase it. Can we get a breakdown of any other instances where we've seen where the numbers have come in lower than what?
Every year,
Promised and
excess
committed?
costs for special education. We could
Right.
definitely do that for you. Yeah.
Well, there's an assumption of what you are expecting to get, and that's what you budget to. And then there's what you actually end up getting reimbursed, right? And so what's the delta there? Because we should be, one, carrying some of that risk in our assumptions, but then two, it'd also be nice to be able to signal and say, hey, state.
Want us to budget this
you
way,
tell us,
yeah.
you tell us that we should be prepared for this, but you're not meeting your end of the bargain here, so.
Can I just add, the reality is the state promises but doesn't deliver.
Yeah.
Well,
It's been
we
a
could
long
go
time.
down that rabbit hole, Mr. Brown. You're right. A good example is this year, we should be getting 88% of special ed excess cost reimbursement. We're anticipating 70%. So that 18%, when you're talking the amount of dollars we're talking that we spend on special ed, is a big number, hundreds of thousands. So we will get you that.
Thank you.
HVAC repairs and maintenance, are we carrying risk barring the results of the HVAC assessment? This is related to a previous question. We must test the air balancing for all schools to start. We are confident that the balancing results will be in our favor, that they're working properly. That's for the air quality. We're not so sure about the HVAC piece. That's where I think there's going to be some modernization, whether it's energy efficiency or that kind of thing.
And just, caveat again, right? So we're doing even more than what we thought.
Correct.
So the risk only increases, it doesn't go down.
Correct.
Right, and Superintendent, can you just clarify that for us from earlier, that it's not just 6 schools?
Correct.
It's now,
Well, the inspection is all the schools, yes.
okay,
But there's also 2 sets of inspections that need to occur. Right now, and Mr. Romano's team is doing this, is what they call the air quality inspections.
Right.
The next round of inspections is the HVAC inspections. So there are 2 separate sets of inspections, and they all have to be posted publicly. And yeah, we imagine a lot of it. I think a lot of you, some of you, I should say, I don't want to misspeak, attended PTAC meetings with me or PTO meetings when we talked about air conditioning in the schools, especially early in the year when we were really up against super humid temperatures and hot second floor classrooms, and the hygrometer conversation about feels like temperatures in buildings. And I think those are the spaces where HVAC conversations are going to start to rear their head in the community. Why do we split electricity out from oil and gas heat? And so Jennifer did a nice job there. One, it's fairly straightforward. One is a contract and one is a commodity. So one we enter into agreement with and one we have to purchase based on market rates. How are the rates for oil and gas looking? That goes back to the other question regarding the energy management consultant and the analysis. So that's coming.
Okay.
How many Hartford students are serviced? How much is the associated cost? Historically, how much of our funding is this? There are 89 students from the Hartford attending Southington Public Schools. However, not all receive special services. Their enrollment is covered by monies associated with the Open Choice Enrollment Grant, and any excess costs, I put access, that should be excess costs, are billed back to Hartford at a dollar-for-dollar rate. Therefore, there are no additional associated costs to Southington for special services. That billing is the Nexus funds. That's the account we're talking about. Why is TESOL the top priority? Our enrollment has nearly doubled since the last academic year, and we currently only have 3 TESOL teachers to service 210 students across 12 schools. And last is the pre-K teacher to offset the legislation. There are 7 elementary teachers requested compared to 2 for the high school. And so the pre-K special education preschool services is required by federal law for Burr babies who will not be seeking a waiver for early K entry. And as we talked about with the high school's original budget proposal to me included far more than 2 teachers. It was when we brought the entire administrative team together and said, look how many personnel requests are on the table, that they dialed back and only put the ones that were mandated by law forward as a request and the one tech ed position, because they saw that the elementary classroom enrollment was driving the need for those personnel requests.
Well, and this might be a good opportunity to kind of just remind everybody that it's the unintended consequences of all the unfunded mandates, and nobody's better prepared to allocate and set our budget line items than the board, right? We count on you, we count on your team and your staff, and unfortunately, we have to make decisions based around requirements that we would probably prioritize our line items in a different format, in a different manner, so.
So I had emailed our state representatives and senator last week. I shared it with all of you, and basically asking for their attention to the implementer bill and the unfunded mandates that come from that. And one of the representatives followed up with me and said, what unfunded mandates are you not in favor of? I said, I'm not in favor of any unfunded mandate that places the local burden on our taxpayers. And as you know from that email, I shared Connecticut was the 6th lowest in the nation in state funding for education, with most of the burden being placed on local taxpayers. So any unfunded mandate isn't coming with state funding. That's why we call it unfunded. It's falling on the taxpayers, and sometimes there's a misconception that districts are being mismanaged because we're constantly asking for more. But the reality is there are unfunded mandates that have costs associated with them that falls on the local taxpayer. And that's the bigger problem beyond just the local budget itself and operating our district daily. That's a challenge that we're still working at. But I think I've had 2 conversations with representatives now, both favorable to the idea. So I'll keep you posted on if that gets any traction.
And can you remind me too, where does the state fall in its ranking and its funding for cost share?
So that was it. That's the 6th lowest in the nation. But 99% of education funding in the state is on property taxes, and that is the highest in the nation. So obviously, the property taxes affect the local taxpayers the most, and that's what we're up against. And so it's really hard, I think, for the town when we're deliberating this budget, because the Board of Ed budget is often the largest portion of a municipal budget. But sometimes there's also the mindset that must be where the most excess is, if it's the largest portion. And it's simply not true.
Okay. Thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Any other questions? Yeah, Mr. Brown.
I probably should have sent this in last night, but when we first started talking about the budget, we were told that the school psychologists were testing more than ever before. I would assume, and if my assumptions are wrong, tell me. I would assume from that there's more students who are then in need of services.
I didn't hear what you said initially.
The school psychologists are testing more. I know
Oh,
I
okay, gotcha.
still have my cold here, whatever it is. They're testing more students than ever before. I would assume from that, then there are more, as a result, students in need of special services.
Correct.
Okay. Are there more IEPs?
Correct.
So I did not see any item in the budget for an increase in special education teachers. I saw very specific ones. I saw school psychologists, 2 social workers, and some very specific, but I didn't see anything. Our special ed teachers budget cut, this came off. Are we okay with the regular special ed teachers?
Yes, we have, over the past couple of budget seasons, where we've had attrition, if we had retirements, we were able to reallocate those FTEs to special education positions without adding up those FTEs, with an effort to try to reduce caseloads.
Sure.
And we have used our PESSER funds for special education positions where possible. We've used Nexus funds for special education positions where possible. And prior to the 2 level services budgets, during Mr. Cannellan's time, we had added some special education staff.
So even though the numbers aren't going up overall, there are more special ed teachers that aren't reflected in the
Well,
budget.
so
really.
there's the position for Stellar. There's the position, there's actually a position you approved all in October because of the K-2 population. And there are positions that we're trying to return from Nexus into the budget. That's 4 special education positions.
Okay.
Yep.
You good? Everybody good?
Yeah, one
Good,
question,
okay.
Mr. Superintendent, so just to dial back a little bit, and relative to the pre-K teachers.
Yes.
So, to my understanding, so this is for the Burr babies, right?
Yep.
Now, are there not programs that we have already set up? I know there's the school at Hatton.
Mm-hmm.
Would any of those programs be able to encompass the amount of projected kids that we would have that would be affected by this
Good.
legislation?
Good question. Right now, the only programs we have are pre-K 3 classrooms and pre-K 4 classrooms. That's the age of the kids. These are kids that are going to be 5-year-olds, and what happens is we have the 2-year-olds that are coming up to 3 are going to fill the pre-K 3 seats. The 3s are going to fill the 4 seats, and those are all full. It's a combination of community peers and the students that are identified either through birth to 3 or through child find. So the pre-K 5 seats need to have to continue because you can't put the pre-K 5 back into pre-K 4 with the 3-year-olds that are coming up to grade 8, the pre-K 4 program.
Understood.
Pre-K 5 currently does not exist.
Thank you.
Okay. Everybody good?
One question.
Here you go.
And thank you for answering all these questions, really appreciate it. When I asked about looking to increase the number of teachers at the high school, we're only asking for 2 in business. Am I correct about that?
2 in business and 1 in tech ed.
And 1 in tech?
Well, and if you look at the entire list, there's a math specialist for the high school as well,
I got
but
all of that, right.
it was, and when we ranked it in priority order, it was not something that I could support at this time.
Is there any possibility of making accommodations with moving personnel to meet some of the requirements in our curriculum, our new curriculum things that there should
Great
be
question, yeah.
maybe.
So if you recall, and I know you will, last year we reduced the middle school teachers by 6, which has pretty much pushed their class sizes to the level that we're comfortable with and not any further, and they would tell you probably beyond what they're comfortable with. And we know that next year that cohort of students, our current 5th graders, is going back up to 6th, and we're in next year's budget, we're going to have to figure out a way to reinstitute those small teams at each of the middle schools based on the size of that cohort for enrollment purposes. So we know we can't pull there. We also know we're asking for 7 teachers for elementary because of the enrollment there. And so there's no attrition based on, closed sections, smaller cohorts in a grade level at any of the schools. And right now, the high school is already sending students in large numbers to the study halls because of unfilled course requests. So we did, and the high school did a tremendous job with this. They did run, for lack of a better term, an audit on the enrollment numbers in all of the sections in elective course offerings and didn't run courses that had low enrollment in order to run other courses that had more course requests. So we've kind of looked at that piece already. So unfortunately, no, I wish, that's a good question, and that would be our first approach before we requested personnel. It's just not there.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And thank you, Mr. Romano. Saying. Just saying. Okay, any other questions regarding the question and answers? No? Okay. All right. We left off last night on page 31, school equipment.
So when we discussed this number last night, although it seems like a big number, it's an increase of $24,000 in a $119 million budget. But as I talked about major projects and equipment and special projects, we have been able the last 2 budget cycles to lean heavily into non-lapsing account funds with one of 2 strategies. Sometimes it wouldn't even make it to a budget, right? It was something that we could bring to this board. You guys would look at the list of items that were requested, you would approve, we would bring it to the Board of Finance, it would be approved, and we would use the non-lapsing fund, so it was never part of an operating budget. Also, we've done tremendous work with non-lapsing funds on major projects. When I think of the auditorium specifically, relative to the curtain, to the sound system, to the lighting, large projects like that, a lot of the flooring projects across the district, we are at a point now that most of that money that we got from non-lapsing was COVID money. It was either because we had federal funds, or, I'll give you a good example, the substitute teacher account during COVID wasn't heavily used, right? And so transportation, we only paid 80% of that contract, so 20% of that was realized savings. So those were monies that were accrued in non-lapsing that aren't coming anymore. As of the last budget, we only had, and I'll keep saying this number because I think it speaks to what a level services budget truly was, less than we had 1/10 of 1% remaining out of that $104 million budget. It was $85,000 total in non-lapsing funds. And that was with no spend down. That was like not at the end of the year trying to, buy extra, paper for the copy machines or buy consumable books that we were needing the following year. That was with no spend down. So I think we've leaned into that pretty well, that use of non-lapsing funds as a strategy. It got us, with a minimum services budget. We don't have that anymore. And that revenue source, that's what I put in the cover letter, is one of the complexities of this budget. It's gone. So I think that's why you now see not only this small number, but as we get deeper into the book around major projects and equipment, those projects are there because there's no other revenue source to cover them. Thank you for that.
Okay. All right, so looking at page 32 and 33. Any questions on any of the projects? Mr. Darrenowski?
Yeah, Darrenowski Elementary School, deep cleaning carpet extractor. And the vendors, there's a commercial carpet cleaner. Big difference in cost for each one of those as a comparison.
There are different types of machines, and in conversations with Mr. Romano and Mr. Lombardo, these machines are ones that can travel between schools. So although these are the schools that are asking for them, many of the schools will benefit through the use of these machines.
Well, just so you know, there's a $3,000 difference between one machine and the other.
We can provide you the information, like a visual obviously would probably be helpful on
Is-
what
yeah.
the machine.
Yeah, what's the different
encompasses.
capabilities of each piece of equipment, right?
Mr. Romano looks willing and eager.
Mr. Romano, can you come to the microphone just because we're streaming tonight?
The less expensive vacuum cleaner, shampooer, the $600 one, is a spot shampooer that they would use specifically at that school. The more expensive one that's at is being requested by Darrenowski, we only have one of those in the district. It's at the high school, and in the summertime, it really is a challenge to get from school to school with that unit. So although it would be sitting at Darrenowski, it would be something that would be used across the district.
Right. How often are these used?
Well, typically, they're only used in the summer months, with the exception of sometimes during the holiday breaks in December or April. They will get used. They can't get it to every school. It's too time-consuming to get it to every single school during those times. The less expensive one is used in the winter months, maybe a few times a week.
They have a lot of the area rugs in the classrooms, the kind of the
Kindergarten
reading areas.
level.
Yeah, I'm
All
aware
it
of that.
takes is a child to have an incident and the spot cleaner's in play.
Yeah. I wonder, has anybody looked into possibly renting a unit?
In previous years, we've considered renting, and we do on occasion actually rent. It's not our preferred method, but if we run short during the summer months, especially when you have a school like Hatton that's being used for summer school, so all they really have is the month of August, which sometimes is a very short month. We actually have also considered having outside vendors come and do it for us. It isn't as cost-effective as doing it ourselves.
Yeah, much too much.
Any other questions on that page? On 33? Moving along. Page 34 and 35. Any questions on Either of those pages? No? Nope. Just so people are aware, Mrs. Mallett, the maintenance vehicle purchase,
That was a finance committee action item this current year. Those who were on the committee last year know that we went back and forth whether we had the funds to do, what we normally did was a 4-year purchase plan on the vehicle. We owned the vehicle, but we made the payments in 4 annual payments, and we did not buy one last year. So during the current year, we were able to allocate a portion of the MERS line item along with the rental of equipment funds to cash fund the purchase of one maintenance vehicle. And that's why it's shown in the 23-24 budget. It was not previously on the major projects and equipment at this time last year.
Dusty just pointed out, I'm looking at a draft copy. I'm not on the same page as you guys, 37. Okay.
37.
I will get on
It
the
was in
correct.
fact on 34, but the
But
wrong
that,
34.
yeah, the wrong 34, so it's all good. It's all good. I'm looking at an older copy and not this copy. Okay. I will get up to you all.
Right, and Ms. Mellon, just to expound on that a little further regarding the vehicle purchase, we actually made that decision to use the MERS fund to make that purchase instead of doing the 4-year lease because we were up against a 9% interest financing, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so in total, we ended up saving on the purchase of that vehicle somewhere in the neighborhood of like $10,000, I believe.
I would have to check on that.
Yeah, okay. Just a notation.
And I think the reason in the past why we've used the 4-year financing is because you can see in a year like this, when you're asking for a one-time purchase of a $50,000 or $60,000 vehicle, it does add to the budget. So by financing it over 4 years, you have more of a flat operating budget. So this was the first year since I've been here that we've done it in this way.
But again, just to make sure everybody's clear, there's no vehicle purchase in the 24-25 budget.
Correct.
Just want to make sure everybody understands that.
I do believe that we have a vehicle on the capital plan that went to the town.
Correct.
Correct.
But not in our operating.
Correct.
Okay. So that's page 37. Looking at page 38. Any questions?
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
I have a question regarding the 22 computers for technology labs. I thought very recently that we had made a purchase of computers, of hardware for computer labs because we were pushing off a software purchase.
Correct. You want to speak to that, either of you guys?
You're right, Sean, we did, Mr. Carson, in this year, we, in our discussion last night, we transferred money from 2 other computer lines to purchase the computers that you're referring to. And this is the plan moving forward, and I'll let Mr. Savage speak to the computer lab.
Yeah, so I think that's referring to, I believe, the World Language Lab that we were purchasing. And then also with 2 tech ed labs that require Inventor software, and then 2 other business labs that require, or art labs that require Photoshop. I believe this would be, I'm not sure what the 22 computers actually in this instance are for, but it looks like they're trying to split 107 in half.
Correct.
Where currently, right now, 107, I believe, is a tech ed room.
So,
Oh, it is?
sorry, Tyler, this is your request for 22 computers to fund the lab. It's not about splitting room C-107.
Oh, okay.
It's part of your large technology plan, and because of the dollar amount, this 40,000 landed on the special projects page as
Okay.
opposed to the large major projects. But this was one of the requests brought forward.
Okay, yeah, so essentially, we were waiting for the software to kind of catch up and be able to take over, but we went through a bunch of different tests where, unfortunately, for like the Inventor softwares and for the Adobe Photoshop softwares, they really didn't do what it needed to do. Plus, the cost of the remote or virtual options really weren't at the place we wanted to be right now. So I did put some numbers together. Basically, it's roughly, for 14 labs, it was roughly, let me get my computer.
Okay.
Here, I have your spreadsheet.
I put numbers together today.
Okay. Oh, I don't have that.
Mr. Carson, you're correct. The World Language Lab computer refresh was the recent one.
Okay.
This is different than that.
Yeah, so essentially, I think this is to get us onto a recycle plan. So the thought process would be every 7 years, one of the labs would require a refresh. And of the other 7, we would be utilizing Perkins funds to be purchasing them. So those are like business labs and things like that. I think the long-term goal is to get them into the cloud. But right now, when we went to look into that, roughly to do the yearly cost for all 14 labs, if they were to be in a cloud option, would be roughly $62,000 a year. So that really cost needs to come down to make it viable, because if you can spend the $40,000 a year on the devices themselves and have them for 7 years and not to have a recurring cost, it still makes fiscal sense to do that option.
Okay, so I'm reading between the lines here. So basically, the replacement cycle is a 7-year cycle
Yes,
on the equipment, on the computers themselves?
yes.
Okay.
And so we'd be purchasing one lab a year, and every 7th year is repurchasing that lab.
Okay, so the expectation then, from a budgetary standpoint, is I'm going to see this $40,000 line item for the next 7 years,
Yes.
at least?
Oh, well, not necessarily. I think every year we're going to revisit it. We're going to say, hey, how is the online option now? Has it come down in cost? Do we have curriculum that we can change to go to the cloud and not require the desktops?
Okay.
And that'll be reevaluated every single year.
Okay,
Some of the challenges associated with some of the classes we offer has software that is not caught up, relative to the web-based or cloud-based performance versus being locally hosted. So that's, Project Lead the Way would be one that comes right to example. We tried to do that, and we did not get the same results.
And Tyler worked very closely with the teachers of those classes, because as we're sitting and getting reports of classes not being able to function, I'll say, efficiently, because out of 20 or so students, if 4 are waiting because the software isn't loading, they're not able. You did test
Yeah.
throughout the year, all different cloud options, and it was difficult even cycling the kids on.
Yeah, so pre-COVID, we had 16 more labs. So since COVID, we have removed 16 labs from the district, bringing us to our current 14. While we did that, we were able to find, like, at the middle school level, there were some art classes that were able to do arts online in a web-based version, but unfortunately for the curriculum and for the job market when you get out, it needs to be Adobe versus an online free tool. So that's what drives the need at the high school level. So we're really trying to get as many out of the school system as we can, because they're one-to-one now. But at this time, everything we tested with these 14 labs, unfortunately, did not provide the teaching abilities for the staff to teach the students.
okay, and just a follow-up question as we're, parsing out this conversation. equipment is one thing, right? And one-to-one devices, I think is enormous for for the district and for students. However, from a network standpoint, in our long-range planning, you know, I've heard what we're doing, you know, with equipment, with computer labs, and I see that direction. As far as network bandwidth and capabilities, as we look in future years to use cloud software and utilize this one-to-one student-to-device ratio, are we prepared to do that? And how soon and at what cost?
So at the high school level right now, we're doing that one-to-one. There's one access point per classroom. And at the middle school level, it's also one-to-one, one AP per classroom, one access point. So that there's
Okay.
enough power and bandwidth at those levels to have this one-to-one consistent. And it has been working. We have been working through replacing old equipment. But as we do that, it's getting improved every time. But even at the old equipment level, it was sufficient. But it definitely wasn't performing as well as it could. At the elementary level, there are plans to expand that, but we really need to refresh the current hardware, and then we can look at expanding. But that is on the map for all of the levels.
And I think for the network at large, we've done some good work in the past few years as a district. We've upgraded the fiber line going into the schools, and we have backup and redundancy now that we did not have before. We've invested a lot of money in the different servers, switches, security, malware. You all know the multi-factor authentication, everything we're doing to both expand and protect the network. You're underselling yourself there because we've actually done wonderful work. And I'm very confident with where we are compared to where we were about 8 years ago when there was a daily email that the network was down, you know. So we've gotten there, but it's a good question, Mr. Carson, because we are still looking ahead to, there is a replacement cycle now for staff devices, for Chromebooks, for the Vizio boards that used to be the smart boards in the classrooms, and then to the various parts of the network that are hardware related, specifically servers that are located in various closets throughout the district.
And I think this would be an interesting topic of discussion for perhaps a future board meeting, if we had further questions regarding software, hardware, where we're going, how we're getting there, that kind of thing. So, thank you.
Thank you for bringing us back to center. I get excited about that. I can go.
I know, because you're the head of technology now. And Mrs. Carmody also gets very excited by it. I could tell by the look on her face. Are there any other, she's not even paying attention to me.
Did you
I'm just
follow
saying.
that conversation, Mrs.
No.
Carmody? You got it all?
You know what?
Absolutely, don't
We
even
were
go
just
there.
discussing that.
Excuse
Yeah.
me, Mrs. Clark, I know.
Yes,
you're making
Mrs. Carmody.
fun of me, but-
I am not making, I'm
Yes,
just,
you are, but that's okay.
That's okay.
Mr. Brown and I were just saying, should we be part of this discussion? Just sit back and listen.
Since we
So-
are the probably
So we're just
technologically
gonna
most,
sit back and listen, okay?
I would say advanced, but I'll
That's good.
be honest,
Hey, when all the
behind.
tech crashes, you guys are gonna know how to use a pen and paper, so.
yeah, that's good. You can
Give
show
me
the
a
rest of
class
them.
of students who can talk, and we'll talk.
Okay, moving right along. May I ask a question about the chiller fence at South End Elementary? Because for the life of me, where is that?
It is, I know the answer to this, behind the school.
It's behind the school? Was there a fence on it
Chiller
before?
fence? Yes, there was, and it's come down, and it's an eyesore, and it's, I don't know if there's anyone there now at all.
It's a wood constructed fence. I'm not sure why it was done that way in the beginning. I think they were trying to make it privacy, but it did deteriorate over time.
Okay.
And we plan to put a chain link fence in there.
Okay, because for the life of me, I'm sitting here going, "Ew." Okay, thank you. Yeah, well, no, because I jog through there, and I'm trying to think, where is this thing? But I haven't been jogging, so oh well. Okay, any other questions on that page?
Nope.
Nope, okay. You good with the technology, Mrs. Carmody, I'm glad. Page 39. Summer school, continuing ed, Jumpstart, Ag Sci and Tech program.
What's the big increase on the first item?
The
Is
big
the-
increase is we have never funded summer school in our operating budget. It was always paid for by the students that were attending. This is the last several summers, we've used the ARP ESSER funds to pay the teachers. One summer or 2 summers, we did the buses. And so this is the cost to have summer school. The teachers, no transportation is included in this. And so that's why there's a large jump. So if you look at the next page, you'll see the breakout between the jump start, which is consistent with the prior year, but the 115,000 is teacher salaries for summer school for summer of '24.
Could we,
So-
oh, sorry. Go
No,
ahead.
no, no. So did the line item just move in terms of where it was allocated at in terms of?
It was grant funded the last several years.
Okay.
And prior to the Art Besser funds, if a student needed to come for credit recovery or enrichment at the summer school level, they would pay a tuition to attend. And the tuition cost, we had a summer school director, and the whole cost of the summer school was paid through student tuitions.
We do still charge for enrichment.
Was there an issue with the grant?
Yeah, we had to expend all of the ARPESR funds by the end of this school year. So the funds are gone.
No more grant.
No more grant.
No more grant.
Yeah. One of the things, just going back to prior to COVID, when we had families, it was often a financial hardship for many families, for students who needed to go to summer school or credit recovery. And so there was a constant battle of, are they not coming because they don't want to, or are they not coming because they can't afford it? And going back and forth in that vein. The other piece is we have language now where we've really tried to not only work with kids in the extended school year who have failed, but kids who we say are recommended for additional summer, intervention or support. And in the past, if it was just recommended but not required, they were never going to come if it was at their cost. So it has helped us exponentially. I know you saw the summer school report and the data that came with it, especially the amount of students that were at one level and then where they finished the following year relative to assessments who received summer school services. There was quite a substantial gain. So there's some pretty good data that's supporting that, providing those students that additional support has helped student outcomes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to kind of highlight too. I assume obviously when pre-COVID, when the burden was on the family to pay for it, obviously that would be a barrier to some students being able to participate. So I would be curious to see, and just to refresh us on the numbers of students who attended summer school pre-ESSER funds and what it was during the time where the grant funding was available and there was no cost.
Yep, you can do that.
It'll help highlight kind of what we believe we would see for participation.
Okay, so on page 40, are there any questions about any of those categories?
You'll see on line 82-113 for the AST teacher salaries that we're budgeting a decrease on that line item. That's because we had a senior member of the ASTE staff retire last summer, so there's savings in the turnover dollars there.
Any questions? Okay. And moving along. Special ed.
So I think this section, at least the cover page, is very much aligned with what you saw in the regular education summary. Much of it is existing salaries and benefits driving a major portion of that increase, coupled with purchase services.
Okay. So everything is described on starting on page 44, so if we look at that.
And keep in mind, the teacher salary line, 83-113, includes 4 teachers that are in Nexus
Nexus
this
now,
current
okay.
year. That's about 224,000 of that increase.
How much was it? 224, you said?
224. Mhm.
So Miss Mellon, just looking at line item 83127, so on the Nexus salaries, looking at the 22-23, the expended. So essentially, so you mentioned that the 4 teachers, is that line item just kind of projected into that?
So when we move this teachers to the Nexus funding, that means they're not in the operating budget, and that's the amount that we spent to pay those teachers. And keep in mind, on the very first section, where we're getting the appropriations back from the town of Southington for the tuition and services that we provide to the Hartford students. So the collections from the city of, the Hartford Public Schools offsets this 275,000, but I can't net them in my ledger. We have to fully disclose the expenses and then account for the appropriations on the front page. So the appropriations are on page 3.
Understood, thank you.
Mr. Williams?
So just looking at the purchase services as a whole, 22-23, we exceeded our budget by like $1.7 million or so. Then in 23 and 24, we raised our budget to be something close to 95% of what we had spent in the prior year, what the actual expenses were. And then in this future year, we're proposing that we're still going to be below what that expended costs were in 22 and 23, which is great. I'm just curious where the savings kind of came from in that, and maybe there's something that speaks to the spike prior and why we haven't seen that since, and we don't expect to.
Well, it is a difficult line item to budget. If you look at account 83319, it's our purchase services. We only budgeted in 22-23 52,000. And again, a piece of this is when we have a one-to-one para for a open choice student, the purchase service comes through in this line, and then we bill the service to Hartford. We get the money, we appropriate it back to ourselves. And again, I can't net it against that line item, so that line item is always a higher than what we budget. And I don't know if you have any comments, but we also have the Medicaid billings for services for students, and that also comes in to offset that line. So I don't know if you have any other thoughts. I know
Your question is that small amount, is that small increase enough based on the bump that we saw 2 years ago?
Yeah, I guess it's two things. One, it's how are we performing this year based off of what we budgeted, and I'm assuming obviously we're performing well based on what I see that you're proposing for the next year. So that's kind of what I just looking for the confidence level that we're not going to find ourselves in an overrun again where we overrun a line item by almost $1 million, right?
So we ran a financial update for the finance committee right after the new year, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so we can just go back and look at that number, what it was as part of the financial update, and put it up against and give you the answer on the Q&A grid.
Yeah, thank you.
And Ms. Mellett, I guess to follow up on that, why can't, I understand you can't net the accounts out, at the within the categorized line item of purchase services, but why can't we budget it accurately?
Well-
I guess is the more important question.
Well, I think what you'll see is that we spend far more than we're budgeting, and that's because we know we're going to be able to, if it's a service that we are purchasing for another district that we're billing back out, I wouldn't want to increase our budget by that amount because it's in the grand total, it's going to be a net to our line item. So I'm budgeting at 230 in the previous year and 250 290 this year. We expect, when you see this in 2 years, that line item is going to be much larger than the 290, but we will have billed out to Hartford for the services of the CREC one-to-one para, which is, if we have the service from CREC, it's about $61,000 for one para, and we bill that out. It comes back to us. We have to appropriate it through the Board of Finance, and it comes back to us, and we list it as an appropriation, not as a grant revenue, not as a net on our books. So I would still expect that we're going to have purchase services in excess of what I'm showing here, but
It's a timing issue, I guess, right?
Right.
With the billing, okay.
Is there some explanation? No, there's not. Is there some way we could put a footnote or some, well, because, it is confusing. You look at that and you go, whoa, what's that? So is there some way, because there's other people that are looking at this budget book and going, what?
It'll look
Yeah.
like we blew it out of the
And
water. but
basically, yeah, and
the reality is,
and
it
I'm
w-
looking at Mr. Leary and Mr. Bedoin, who are gonna be getting this, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I know they go through the budget very carefully. So is there some way we could put something in there?
Yeah,
I don't know if,
When we finalize the budget with all of
Yeah.
you, there's a nice section of white right adjacent to it in the book that we could put a footnote there for that.
Okay, just so everybody has the same explanation. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Mr. Vishuski.
I feel like I ask this question every year, but just to drive the point home. In our special education budget, how many students are we serving out of our entire student population with this?
Dr. Cavallaro?
Right now, I can get you the exact number tomorrow because it's a moving target, but it's about 1,090.
1,090 out of our 6,000 plus students?
Yes.
So essentially, roughly a third of our budget is being utilized to teach 1,090 roughly of our students, which I would imagine that this number could potentially be 50 or to 70% more if we were having to outplace
Oh, easily.
into
Absolutely.
different programs, correct?
Yes.
So, again, just to drive home the point that this is something that, I know with Mr. Cannellan and certainly superintendents before him, it's been a prerogative of this board to continue to, again, keep students where they should be in their own communities, as well as keeping costs down effectively. So, I feel like I always want to make that point every single year that this is something where it's like, gosh, like, this is a big nugget, and,
So I
there's a lot of good
approached
happening here.
the state with this. I'm on the legislative committee for CAPS, and I think I've shared this with you, but it's good for the public knowledge around this because of the amount of the cost, and we're talking about the number of students we're servicing. It's my very strong opinion that if you're doing a good job with your continuum of services, the threshold for reimbursement from the state should only be 3 times their per pupil. Right now, it's 4.5 times, regardless of whether they're in your district program or whether they're not in your district program and outplaced. It doesn't necessarily incentivize districts to provide in-district programming, right? But we're doing it at a controlled cost because we can determine what we're paying our staff. Whereas students who are outplaced, you're subject to whatever that the prices that they pass on to each year relative to increases. And so I feel that there are some that just don't do it, and they'll send them out, and the cost is so high that they're going to reach the 4.5, times. And we have many students that don't reach the 4.5 because we're able to keep them at around 3 times the per pupil expenditure.
Right.
So it is still a savings to us because we're not hitting that point. But I think there should be some incentivizing for districts that are doing it well. And I've said that, and a couple, to their credit, have responded and are looking at that. I brought it up with CAPS as a major legislative priority, and instead I was vetoed. And I think it's because we're one of the few districts that have the continuum of services that it probably works for. They said they would instead prefer to go for 100% reimbursement in excess cost, which we'll never see because we don't even see 88% now, so I don't know how they're going to get 100. But that's where they're putting their weight. So I was hoping to help Southington on that front, and I still continue to lobby with our local delegates on that front.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Medancy, when you and I went to the legislative session up in Hartford last year, the other districts were all complaining about the cost of these outside sources, which, oh, by the way, are not regulated price-wise. If I'm not mistaken, they can charge whatever they want, and if their reputation is good, well, that's fine. These districts are sending their students, rather than keeping them in-house as we do, and they're hitting the 4.5% with no problem, and the schools, I don't know how good they are, but there were a couple of them, Dr. Cavalera's making a face there, but a couple of them they were referred to, and the names were not very complimentary, shall we say? So we do a better job keeping our students here. Yeah, it's a large number, but it's far smaller than what it would be if our students were outplaced, which isn't the place for them, so.
Well, and let's not gloss over, 1,090 students in
Is-
this that's a large,
That's a lot of
large number
children.
of students, and that
Yeah.
can get very expensive very quick. So,
Yeah.
again, the fact that we're able to provide services locally here in our own district for them
Absolutely.
is the right way to, we
Yes.
should be approaching this.
Yes. Okay, I'll get off now. All right. Any other questions on those two pages? 45? All right, 46 and 47.
One of the items at the bottom of this page is $19,500 for classroom furnishings for the new pre-K 5 classroom. So if the teachers are all approved, this 19.5 should also come with it.
Okay. Now, is there just going to be one classroom? Is that what's anticipated, is one classroom of students?
Yes,
Okay, okay.
for the pre-K 5 special education preschool.
But they're also going to have typical peers
They'll
with
have
them.
community peers because
Okay,
that's part of the
okay.
model. But we're also talking about a potential second section of pre-K 5 at the high school for students that are not identified as Burr babies but don't receive a waiver.
Okay. Which, oh, by the way, as a former preschool teacher, I love the idea of the little people being with the big people. I think that's just such a wonderful for both sides, so, but that's just my personal opinion. I'm just throwing it out there. Okay. Anything on 47? No? Okay. 48 and
Let's, and we've kind of touched on it already, but just expand on the out-of-town tuition increase, if you would.
Which page?
On page 48,
48.
account 83370.
So these are the students placed at outside facilities by our local agency here. And this is where you run into the excess cost calculation. So you can speak to the spreadsheet that you guys have.
So, excuse me, some of the increase is based on the review of the current students for this year that we anticipate will be continuing. And then we also have the change of the state with the age-out age, which is now, as Superintendent Medancy said yesterday, it's no longer at your 22nd birthday, but you are allowed to stay that entire year. So students that we anticipated last year would age out in, let's say, July. They have the benefit of continuing an entire school year, and we would be responsible for that tuition.
Thank you.
And along with the exact number of, how many children are being outplaced out of that, could you?
Right now, we're at about 62. I could double check that.
Okay, that's fine.
I know
That's
we're
fine.
under 65 at this point.
Okay,
We
okay.
have a lot of students coming back and graduating mid-year, so
Okay.
we're trying to do our best to keep it capped.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Any other questions? No? All right. And then we have the explanations on 49, 50, 51. Any questions on any of those, the explanations? No?
Page projects.
Major projects.
up 1,075%. That's great.
Yeah, because last year it was 0. Okay.
There was 120,000 last year.
It was?
Yeah, but still,
Oh,
that's
okay,
virtually
I'm
zero in
looking,
a
I'm
$104
looking.
million budget, yeah.
No, I'm looking at 22, 23.
22, 23 was zero.
Well, I'm still not in 24 yet, I'm sorry. Okay. Do you want to say anything about this, Mr. Medancy? before
No,
we-
I think I spoke to it already with our reliance on non-lapsing funds in years past.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have any questions? No. No? Some of these we've seen before. Yeah.
Well, it includes a lot of what we've already talked about, the HVAC and what have you, right? That's driving a lot of this cost.
Correct.
Furniture replacement, replacement of walkways, ramps, and sidewalks, testing, testing, testing. Hardware updates, window replacements. Yeah.
One question. Just this item here, I know that we've talked about it for the removal of the darkroom, W284. Can that be repurposed as is that going to be repurposed as another classroom?
Classroom space, yes.
Okay.
Yes, and they're actually chomping at the bit. They've been asking for that now for at least 4 years. Because it's actually a popular class that they host in there, but they have to cap the enrollment based on the number of the limited space because it's essentially half a classroom.
Okay.
I'm chuckling because Mr. Oroyan gave us a tour of that last year. Very excited to get rid of that room
Well-
because it's taking up so much space inside a classroom
Right.
that,
Well, and historically, I know that we've always like touched on that, so I mean, I would ask that we, regardless of what happens over the next couple of weeks, can we please like highlight that and make that a priority? Because, again, space is already limited.
And that's almost like the addition of a teacher, right?
Right.
Or a portion of a teacher. I wouldn't say a whole teacher, but if you can add students to sections that are being held in that classroom, those are seats that are being filled.
Well, that's what I mean, like, this is stuff that we could get creative on and,
that and
start moving the
removing the
football.
office in C230. I mean, that was another one that, there was a class going on. It was crowded because there's an office inside the classroom.
Yeah.
So those are two things that, yeah.
Let's do it.
That's true.
Okay. Any other, Mr. Carson?
Yeah, I have two things real quick. And it just revolves around the need. Rekeying interior locks at the high school and then electrical upgrades at Darrenowski.
So the electrical upgrades are proposed for 27, 28. They're not part of next year's budget. So if you look at the columns, the row at the top, it shows the proposed year. So the electrical receptacle upgrade at Darrenowski for 112,000 is for the 27, 28 proposed budget. The rekeying we have spread over multiple years because of the cost associated with it.
Okay, but what's the need to rekey locks?
Sure. One of the challenges in the high school, as we know, it's an incredible facility. It's rather large, and right now you've got 5 to 7, I'd say, different master keys to key into different spaces. In an emergency situation, that's one example that poses a real challenge. If you have to clear areas and clear it's very difficult when you're flipping through 7 different keys on a key ring in order to gain access to a classroom. The other challenge that it poses is just in a day-to-day operation. School security is one in which we want to make sure that as teachers, they have to share space. So if I leave my classroom or a classroom that we share, because I have now a class across building, we're transferring at the same time. To leave that door propped open is a safety risk. But you may not have the same set of keys that I have because there's so many different keys to get into all the different places.
Okay, thank you, that makes sense.
If you know anybody who works for a lock company, we would love to pilot a fob system that would put all of us without the keys, but just if you know anybody.
We
Yeah.
may know
Yeah,
somebody
yeah.
on the board. I won't mention any names.
With regards to the electrical upgrades at Darrenowski, and now mind you, I understand that's years from now. Obviously, we're in discussions currently, with new school construction and possibly rehabbing. What is the thought or idea, and again, the ultimate need in doing electrical work at the current Darrenowski building?
So it is these are one of the items that you have to reflect the need, right, somewhere so people are aware. Because if we continue to admire the problem, that what are we going to do with the building and what's the future of it, then you're going to get to a point that we've admired it for too long. It's kind of the old analogy of paralysis by analysis. And then the electrical system's no longer going to be useful, and we're running up against a different problem. The other piece that we talked about at the district-wide facilities committee meeting is, what is the cost if we do nothing? So when you look at Darrenowski, we know right now for 2720, there's $275,000 worth of work slated, 30,000 and change at Flanders, and 175,000 at Kelly. So we want to articulate work that still need to be done there if we do nothing, because we're kind of getting to that pressure point where things are at the end of their useful life, or it's deferred maintenance that can't be deferred any longer.
Okay, so what I just gathered out of that discussion is that the biggest chunk of change is at Darrenowski.
It's the largest building and the oldest building.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Any questions? You're giving a key, Mrs. Carmody?
Key to the kingdom.
The person that we know that's in the business of doing lots, showing me what a key looked like,
Oh,
Okay.
in case I didn't know.
What about a key fob?
You're going too far now.
That's a little over my head, Sean.
I think perhaps Mr. Oshana and Mr. Medancy should have a conversation
together? Yeah,
offline.
that
I
would be
think that would
nice.
be a wonderful idea. And perhaps it could have some impact on our budget, but I'm not saying that. Okay. Are there any other questions on 54, 55? Mr. Brown, did you have your hand up? No? Oh, okay. Okay. 56, here's the projects, Darrenowski. Kelly School. Flanders. Excuse me.
I will note that I appreciate that we've got a year-over-year kind of forecast on the projects, whereas like in years past, right, it was just kind of that year's non-lapsing plan. So being able to kind of look ahead, because these projects, if they're funded from the operating budget, they become part of the operating budget, and that number never goes away. So it's good to see kind of how we're looking ahead at how that money will be used in the following years after this budget. So thank you for the visual and the visibility there.
Sure.
And you'll note on page 60, there's a breakout, a chart of all the classroom furniture that was requested from many of the schools. Our past practice has been to group them all together and consider them as classroom furniture replacements. So the actual detail of what we're proposing on the main schedule is broken out on page 60.
Okay.
And Mr. Carson, just because it's related to an earlier question, page 58, Mr. Savage does a nice job with that chart, kind of looking ahead to what the network costs are going to be.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking at it right now.
Lapsing.
What projects? A lot, a lot. Can I ask a dopey question?
Depends.
Okay.
There are none.
If you. Now, the required testing, which. Asbestos. Isn't the asbestos supposed to be sealed? So what do? Have to inspect to make sure the seal is still, is that how it works, or?
No, if they test and it comes back with a negative reading, the assumption is that it is sealed.
Oh, okay. So every 5 years we have to, every 2 years?
3 years.
3, I was close. Okay. Okay.
And that has to be done by an independent agency. It can't be done by the district.
Okay.
Just creep up on you. Asbestos is tricky like that.
Yeah, thanks. No, I just, yeah, okay,
Frustrating.
yeah. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and to Mr. Williams' point, the required testing of the asbestos, the National Fire Protection Association tests, we put those in the 5-year plan in the year that they're going to be required, so you'll see that neither of those is due next fiscal year, but we work it in there so that we keep track of it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Brown?
I have a philosophical question. I'm not looking for an answer here. Okay. Some advice, maybe. I struggle, since I've been on the board, with, we hire you and our staff as professionals to make decisions about where to spend the money. So would you prefer, I'm not looking for an answer, I'm looking for maybe some thoughts, that we give you a number and you come up with where the cuts are, or that we give you a list of what we think should be cut, or a combination of the two, maybe a number with some guidance? And I'm not looking for an answer, I'm maybe some thoughts to share with us before we get to the nitty-gritty of deciding on a budget.
Yeah, I think, thank you. Yeah, I would like, obviously some time to think about that. I think we have another opportunity. I have a week to chew on that question maybe, and we can come back, because I think on the 25th, I imagine there may be still some questions, or you guys have had some time to digest all the information that you've received in the past 2 days, because it is a lot, and maybe have some thoughts. And so I would welcome that conversation next Thursday.
Thank you.
I think if you asked me what I thought, I would be requesting everything that people are asking for because it's warranted.
But we would too.
But I also,
love to
I
do
also
that.
am conscious
Live in a
of the
real world,
reality.
though.
Yes, I say that facetiously. I
Yes.
would never do that.
That's where the philosophical discussion.
Yes.
That's why, yes.
All right. Non-lapsing.
So we have a whopping $7,000 there.
Wowzers.
You made the real important point, we said it before, but you gotta say it again. All the non-lapsing money came from COVID.
Yes.
So to think that that's gonna be there ever again, it's not gonna ever be there again.
Not in
So,
that, not in
let
that
us hope.
number, yeah.
Hope. Well,
Yeah.
but in the normal world, we're not gonna see
No.
that. We never saw it before, and we're not
Not
gonna
gonna
see
say
it.
it again. Let's hope. Okay, so that's it. 7641.
But, I mean, let's celebrate I mean, that's pretty damn awesome as far as being able to manage our budget in a way where, that's razor thin, guys. Like, that's a huge feather in our cap as far as what we're doing. Granted, it doesn't leave us open to be able to do some of the, I mean, wants that, I don't want to just call them wants, but we're appropriately spending taxpayer money on a great education system. So, thank you guys for that.
Thank you.
Okay, now to the grants.
Just one question, and it's more of a clarification, just to make sure that we're all tracking it. So when we look at the grants, you go down to the special education excess cost grant.
Yep.
That's not yet available. Though the data's not yet available, we've already factored what we believe it will be into our assumptions
For next year.
for next year, right? It's already baked into some of the numbers that were prior.
Yes. And we've projected 70% because that's typically what
Got
we've
it,
got.
yep, yep. I just, because when we look down this, when it says not yet available, I don't want anybody who's looking at this that maybe isn't putting the two things together to say, oh, well, there's an opportunity, there's going to be, $2.3 million. We've already factored that into the budget line items previously discussed.
And keep in mind that last column there is the current year that we're in. So these are the grant revenues that are projected for the current year that we're in.
Yep.
To your point, the special ed excess cost grant, we won't know that number until the end of February.
I got you.
Home budget.
Thanks.
Okay.
A lot of-
Other questions?
A lot of grants have gone away.
Correct.
They have, yes, they have. Mr. Darrenowski?
As we leave this evening, we're going to have another discussion at our next board meeting.
Yes.
So between now and then, if there's any questions come up, who should we address them to? Your office or through?
If you would email them to me, you can copy Mrs. Mellett and our chair, and we'll add it to the document so that everybody has all the questions that were asked over the week. And I'll try to think of the easiest way so that everybody has the information. Yeah, that would work.
Well, we shouldn't send it to the whole board because that constitutes a
Board meeting.
illegal meeting.
Correct.
But could we share a question and answer grid electronically with the group? So as they're asking questions, if they're reviewing one evening and they see something and somebody else has already asked it? Or what's your thought on the Q&A grid?
No, the conversations we've had about cloud-based communications constitute an illegal meeting.
Okay, perfect.
But if it's just one way, if somebody's asking a question and you send the answer out to the whole board, that's only one way.
Correct.
So that would be okay.
Yeah, it just
We
can't be
just
done
can't
through like a
comment.
cloud doc.
So if David asks a question and then
If everybody sees the question and I answer it for everybody.
Yeah.
If it's in cloud-based, that constitutes an illegal meeting because it's essentially discussing something, outside of a public meeting, just doing it behind the guise of a cloud, right? But transitory correspondence, like if I just send it out as informational to you and it's not discussed
Right.
amongst you and there's no response back to me from all 9 of you, then that's allowed.
okay, so.
Well,
All right.
what if, in the spirit of that, Mr. Darrenowski, I mean, why not just keep this going and then maybe
Well, that's
not
what it is.
responding so much to, that's essentially what we're going to do?
Do that.
Yeah, because I can easily say, thank you, I've already received that question, and others would know it's already been asked and
Yeah.
it'll be addressed Thursday evening, definitely.
Okay.
Does work.
Or even just updating this and sending it out,
Yeah.
on a
I can
daily
do that as part of the
basis
update if
based
I
on
have the
whatever
questions, yeah.
we're getting.
But I imagine it being a running document right up until next Thursday.
Probably.
Well, that's what we do with the Board of Finance. They send their questions and then.
We change the header, we update the date, and we send it
Yeah,
back out.
Yeah.
My
We do
my
the
goal
same
is I
thing.
want to get this number to about 138, so we're at 24 guys, so let's get cracking.
Okay. Any questions with anything else, or you just want to look it over and digest it?
Are you done?
Well, if you're done, I am.
Well, I have a question.
Okay, ask a question.
Jen, I'm looking through this. Okay. All the Perkins grants are gone?
No, there's still one Perkins grant up in the middle of the section.
Like all
We
zeros
get,
there.
There were some one-time Perkins grants that were at the bottom there, but this current year, our Perkins grant is $65,601. So we do still get that.
Because those were big for us, those grants, you know.
We were able to get a lot done with
I
those in
know,
years past,
I
yes.
know. Couldn't believe it. Okay, thank you. That was just something when I was looking at it, I couldn't believe it. Thank you, Jen.
You're welcome.
I guess I have a clarifying, so when we're talking about Nexus and everything else, so being part of that open choice program, this is this 466, 478 grant that's in,
If it's Nexus, that's not a grant. That's.
this isn't, so
It's the
is this
open
like
choice
the,
enrollment grant.
thank you
That's the
for
one I was referring to.
participating?
Yeah,
here's
based
a
on the number of
$500,000?
students, we get a grant based on the number of students that are in.
Okay,
And that's the open choice enrollment grant.
Okay.
There's also another grant associated with open choice is the academic enhancement and retention grant.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a third grant with open choice, which is the early childhood grant, which is actually what we're using this year to fund all the kindergarten screeners and the materials and the training and everything that we're doing as part of our pre-K-5 program. We were able to do that because we had that grant funding.
okay, and so essentially, as far as Nexus, because Hartford, for example, pays us dollar for dollar, this is essentially additional money that's, we're able to use toward.
No, because that's the piece that I've talked to people. The misnomer is we're billing them because our staff is working with them.
Right,
So the money, the dollars are going towards, like if I had said we need a speech and language pathologist at any point in a budget over the years, it's not in this budget. It's because we're servicing kids, let's say from Hartford, that are going towards the cost of that speech and language pathologist. We're just billing that back to Hartford so that they're covering the salary of the additional services that the SLP students maybe receive, or that the students from Hartford are receiving from the SLP. So it kind of becomes a wash essentially.
okay. So we don't essentially make anything by
No,
participating?
that's, and I think that's where Mrs. Mellett and I are trying to get back to with in terms of like, that's not a safe place to be staffing personnel salaries because
Right.
we're already paying those salaries. yeah.
So again, I guess, so part of my question, I guess I overlooked it. So, in the question that you answered for me, I guess there was a fourth aspect to that question?
Yeah.
Is why do we participate?
In the open choice program?
Yeah.
It's part of what they call a voluntary agreement, and it was related to a state lawsuit, Chef versus O'Neill. So the Chef settlement requires all districts in Hartford County to voluntarily participate.
So voluntelling, this is not volunteering at all, it's okay, thank you.
Great. It's kind of like when everyone's going to jump in Sloper Pond here in a couple of weeks.
I'm going, I'll do it.
And Sean?
Sean's gonna do it.
Yes,
Mrs.
Mrs.
Carmody
Carmody.
already told me she's in.
So I got one question too, if I could. Can- Go ahead. Certainly.
Oh, Lordy.
Steve, I was reading today an article in the Hartford Current about one of the state mandates because of our statewide student math and reading scores. So they've mandated that we have these programs in place. Now, I know we've already are doing wonderful things with that. But there are many communities, wealthy communities, that are trying to get out of it, and they have. What are we doing about that?
Well, I read the same story today, and they haven't. And
So
the
I didn't read it
the
correctly?
people that have gotten out of it are actually underperforming districts that received the waiver, and that's the question.
Westport?
Correct.
Didn't.
You saw
And
that,
Greenwich,
right?
Yeah, I
they
read the same
didn't
article. They
get out.
testified that they shouldn't have to comply because they are so high performing, but they have not received a waiver.
And we are doing what?
So we submitted a waiver. It was denied, just like Westport, New Canaan, and everyone else. So we have no choice but to comply with the law at that point. We did the best we could. We met with the State Department of Education. We pled our case why we felt our reading curriculum sufficed. The one piece I think that with that legislation, and I don't want to get off because we're in a special meeting about the budget, so I've got to be, but relative to the cost associated with the reading mandate, there's no provision for performance in that legislation. There's nothing that speaks to how a district performs relative to what your curriculum, whether it's aligned with the science of reading or not. So for districts that are arguing based on performance, there's not a provision that allows you to opt out based on performance. So it's really kind of a non-argument. The argument that they only would have is that their curriculum is aligned with the science of reading or it's not.
Just another one of those mandates that just drives me crazy. You know?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So you read the same
Yep.
article.
And Mr. Bachevsky, I just want to go back and say one more thing about the open choice participation. Yes, we voluntarily participate, but it is also good to have students.
I understand that.
Offered in our schools, and I was
100%.
short-sighted in telling you why we have to participate, because
Yeah.
I think that was your question. But I think we want to too, because the students that come to us from Hartford bring a lot to our school community. And we have students from Southington that go to some of the Hartford charter magnet schools that get a lot from those communities. And so I do think there's something of value there.
Yeah, no, and again, it's just the same way with special education and things like that. There's a difference of what we have to do, and then there's a difference of what we should be doing anyway, right? So, and again, like I say that partially tongue-in-cheek, just because I feel like there's never enough reciprocation. I think it goes back to the whole funding aspect, where, keep piling things on, expecting teachers to do more and more. Again, the amount of stuff that our teachers have to keep straight now with the different IEPs and this and that, and, constantly having to do things that, I guess, muddy the waters outside of the actual teaching component. It's frustrating, and it makes things more expensive. Anytime the government says, I'm here to help,
Watch out.
get your checkbooks out.
Watch
So,
out, folks.
yeah.
Okay, anyone else have any?
Yeah, just one thing I was going to ask for is that if maybe a future board meeting downstream, if we could get a refresher on grants, just grants that we're going after, that we're applying for, success rates, those kinds of things, just something maybe it'd be interesting to see.
I
to
can
know.
provide actually a nice summary for you of what we've gone for and what we've received. Sometimes as part of my administrative reports over the past 12 months, we've shared some of that.
Right.
Mr. Savage has done a great job with grants. We've gotten, I think that's helped us immensely after the ARPAS rounds. But we've chased a bunch of grants, and we've been successful with some and not so much with others. Some of it has to do with our demographic and our community wealth factor. There's some state criteria that unfortunately disqualifies us from competing
Sure.
for a lot of the grants.
Yep. No, it'd just be cool to see
Yep,
just a
we can do
comprehensive
that.
list that's been updated. Thank you.
Okay, anything else? Thank you, staff,
Thank you.
people
Yeah.
in the audience for coming, for watching. To be continued.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
More keys?